Good day, everyone. For today's discussion, it is about customs of Tagalogs. From the word itself, customs of Tagalogs, what comes into your mind? Okay, Tagalogs, here it is referred to Filipino people. And customs, when we say customs, it is about the tradition, culture, beliefs, way of living. Customs of Tagalogs, it is about Filipino people, way of living, their tradition, beliefs, and many others. These customs of Tagalogs, it is an account or document wrote by Juan de Plasencia, where he tells what exactly Filipino before the Spaniards arrived in Philippines. Before we will tackle or discuss the accounts or the document of customs of Tagalog, we will get to know first who is Juan de Plasencia. Juan de Plasencia, he is a Spanish priest of the Franciscan order. He arrived in Philippines in 1578. He spent most of his missionary life in the Philippines, and he wrote the books intended to promote understanding of both Spanish and the natives, the local language among the missionaries to facilitate the spread of Christianity. And he is to believe that he is the author of the first book in the Philippines, the Doctrina Christiana. Now we will tackle the accounts of Juan de Plasencia, the customs of Tagalogs. Before the Spaniards arrived in the Philippines and colonized us, we have our own social, political, and economic system, and it was called a barangay. The barangay came from the word balanghay, which means abode. The barangay consists of 100 houses, but not less than 30. It is a tribal gathering in Tagalog. As what I said earlier, Tagalog refers to a Filipino people. The lands which the Filipino people inhabited were divided among the whole barangay and the irrigated portion. No one belongs to another barangay would cultivate them unless if it is purchase or inheritance. The lands like mountains cannot be divided but owned by a common barangay. In every village or town, there are many barangay. And in every barangay, it is governed by a dato or chief. In some villages, the dato or the chief, they had fisheries for their economic, and they established limits and sections for markets. And no one could fish or trade in the markets unless without paying for that privilege or unless they are not from that village or from that barangay. The Filipino society is divided into different social classes or levels. These social classes is based on the wealth, influence, and privilege that enjoyed by our ancient Filipino or pre-Hispanic Filipinos. Pre-Hispanic Filipinos, it is a term used to Filipino before the Spaniards colonized them. As we can see in this hierarchy, the dato or the chief is in the top or in the highest rank. He is the superior and the most powerful. The dato or the chief, he is not just govern the barangay but also to his people. Dato or the chief is the captain of wars, and the people under his territory or under his barangay will obey to him and gives much respect. Below is the three castes. Caste, it is a group of people that have their own social classes or a group of people that differ from societal status. Next to dato or chief is the nobles or maharlika. When we say nobles or maharlika, they are free-born, which means they can do whatever they want without any control. And the maharlika or nobles do not pay tax or tribute to the dato, but he protect and accompany the dato in any war. If the dato want to build a house, the maharlika will help him and must offer him food. In another village or in another barangay, the maharlika or nobles paid annually to the dato 100 gantas of rice. The reason why there is some maharlika or nobles need to pay annually 100 gantas of rice, it's because of the time of the settlement of maharlika and nobles, where another chief or dato occupied that land, and upon his arrival to that village or barangay, the dato purchased that land and bought his coat. So therefore, the members of the barangay must pay for him for the arable land. Next to nobles or maharlika is the commoners or aliping namamahay. The aliping namamahay, they are married and they serve their master, whether it is a dato or not. Then, he must accompany the dato or his master whenever he went. The alipin ng mahay, they have their own houses, and they are the lords of their property and gold, which means they are the owners of their own property and no one can steal it from them. The children of the commoners can enjoy their life and cannot be slaves, nor the parents and the children cannot be sold. The commoners and or alipin ng mahay cannot be taken away if the dato want to live in another village or another barangay. They cannot be carried away with another village or barangay, together with their master or with the dato. But they will remain in their native village, doing service and cultivate the lands. And this is the last societal status or social classes of early Filipinos, the slaves, or aliping sagigiler. Aliping sagigiler and aliping ng mahay is differ from each other because the aliping ng mahay, they serve their master only if he wanted to. But in aliping sagigiler, they serve their master in his own house and on his cultivated lands. The aliping ng mahay, they cannot be sold and enjoy their life. But the aliping sagigiler, they can be sold if their master wants to. This is the main reason why the Filipinos or early Filipinos put in that levels in slaves or aliping sagigiler. First, the in captivity in war. Second, reason of death. Third, inheritance. Fourth, by purchase or committed a crime. And the slaves can only ransom himself or herself through tail. Tail, it is a fine gold which the sagigiler give to the dato to ransom himself in that social status. The price of the ransom was never less than 5 taels or 5 gold. If the aliping sagigiler or the slaves give 10 or more taels or gold, they might, and if they both agree, he will become free or he will become a maharlika or noble. The societal status of pre-Hispanic Filipinos can inherit the child through following. For the dato, the first son inherits his father's position. If the first son dies, the second succeeds, and if there is no male or absence of male, the eldest daughter became the dato or chief. In this caste, those who are maharlikas on both mother and father's side can enjoy their life forever as a maharlika. It only happens that they should become slaves is through marriage. Like if the maharlikas have children among their slaves, either aliping namamahay or aliping sagigiler, the child or the mother became free or became as nobles or maharlika. Next, if one of them had children by the slave of woman from another, which means from another village or from another barangay, the slave woman must give her master half of gold tael because of her inability to labor during the pregnancy. In that case, half of the child was free or became nobles, like his father, and half belongs to him. If the father did not recognize it as his child, the child will become a slave. If a free woman or the maharlika had child with a slave, but it was not her husband, they were all free. Now we already discussed about how the child inherit the societal status of their parents. Now we will talk about the division of the child, how they will divide the child. First, if the two persons married whom was a maharlika and one was a slave, either namamahay or sagigiler, the children were divided alternately. Like the first child goes to the father, the second goes to mother, the third goes to father, the fourth goes to mother, and so on. If a father belongs to a slave, then all those who belong to him will become a slave. If a father belongs to a nobles or maharlika, then those who belong to him will become maharlika or nobles. Same goes to the mother. If their child is an odd number like 7, 9, 5, the 5, 7 or 9 or the odd number will have slaves or have nobles. When one is married to another village or from another barangay, the children were divided equally between the two barangays. And if the maharlika wants to move from another village or to another barangay after their marriage without paying any fine gold, failure to pay the fine gold might result a war between the two barangays, which the person left and the one which entered. There are laws which condemn that who insulted the daughter or the wife of the dato. They condemn to no one's slavery unless he merited the death penalty. The witches, they will kill them, and their children became slaves of the chief. The culprit were punished by fine gold. If the culprit cannot pay early, the culprit must serve to whom the money was to be paid. This was done through the following. First, half of the cultivated lands and their produce must belong to the master. Second, the master must provide the culprit and his child enough money to pay his debt. And the master must clothe his children. In that way, if the culprit could not meet the payment, they will remain as slaves, including his children. But if the culprit had some relative that could pay for him or that can ransom him, he was obliged to do the half service until he can pay. The creditor is called when the one who helped the culprit. Where if the creditor were not served as what they both agreed, the culprit must double the pay of what was he lent. The culprit will be considered as a debtor, and the debtor will condemned to a life of toil. And the borrowers became slaves. After the death of the father or the culprit, the children must pay what his father did. Next, let's proceed for the marriage. The parents of a man must give his son a dowry in order to marry the daughter of the dato or the chief. The dowry must greater than any other son. Dowry, it refers to a property or money bought by the husband on their marriage. Dowries are given by men to the woman's parents, and both of them can enjoy the use of it. If the husband and wife will get divorced before the birth of a child, the wife left the husband for a purpose like marrying another, and all her dowry and equal addition amount fell to her husband. But if the wife left her and not marry another, the dowry will return. If the husband left his wife, he lost half of the dowry and the other returned to him. If it happened that they have children at the time of the divorce, the whole dowry and fine gold went to the children and was held by grandparents or other responsible relatives that can take good care of them, that can take good care of the child. Now we will proceed for the inheritance. The legitimate children or their own children can inherit it equally through the following. If one had a child by two or more legitimate wives, each children receive inheritance and the dowry to his mother and share of his father's estate. Second, if a man has a child, one of his slaves, and considered it as his legitimate child, the former had no inheritance, but the legitimate child can bound or able for him to let his mother free from slaves and became a noble or maharlika. Or the legitimate child can give his mother something like gold or a slave to serve for her. And lastly, if there were no legitimate or natural child, the inheritance went only to the father, grandparents, brothers, or nearest relatives. And that is all for our today's discussion. I hope you learned today about our ancient Filipino, what are their way of living before the Spaniards established themselves and colonized the Philippines. Our ancient Filipino have their own social, political, and economic system, and Filipino society divided into different social classes: the dato or chief, maharlika or nobles, commoners or aliping namamahay, and slaves or aliping sagigiller.